Okay, that's the database that's open. Again, in the exam, it will really help you if you open each table and find out what's inside of that table. So we'll double click on guest, and guest has a guest ID, a first name, a last name. I really can't see the whole thing, so it's better to look at the design. So when you open the table, click on design, and you can see there are like several fields in there. I have a guest ID, first name, last name, the address, the country, and the phone. If we open property, again in design view, I have a property ID, a property name, a location, a country, a night rate, a bedrooms, number of bedrooms, the number of sleeps, and the property type and a description. And then I open reservation, and I see I have a reservation ID, I have a guest ID, I have a property ID, a start date and end date, and people and rental rate. What does this tell you about the database? What can you tell about this database? What is it about? Yes? I want an answer for the question.
What is it telling you about the database?
Yeah. So it's probably about an agency that rent properties to customers or to guests. They have certain properties, and the guests make reservation for these properties. That's what we can tell right now from these three tables. And now, okay, so these are like the three tables that when we looked at them, we said, okay, this database is about an agency that rent properties to guests, and they make reservation for the specific property that they are interested in. Now, going back to the exam, it says open the guest table, choose a primary key, save and close the guest table. So we'll go back and say, here is my guest table. I've already opened it in design. So you're saving yourself time by doing that first step, opening all of the tables and looking at their design. What do you think? Which one should be the primary key? Before answering, we have to ask ourselves, what is a primary key? It is a record that is unique in every row inside of the table. So if this is the table about guests, every guest must have a unique value that recognize them, that identify them. So can the first name be unique? No. There are tons of Thomas. Can the last name be unique? No. Which field is unique? Guest ID. Now, how can I designate that particular? So you can highlight it and then click on primary key at the top. And that will designate that particular record as the primary key. You will have the same question on the exam. So you really need to pay attention. When I'm trying to answer that question, I look at the design of the table. I choose the particular record, the field that is unique for every guest. And you said it is the guest ID. You highlight it, and then you click on primary key at the top. So, the second question asks you to do the same for the property and then for the reservation. So, in the property, again, when you double click, you should see the data. And you cannot do anything to the design of a table in the data sheet. You have to go to the design view, which means you click on that icon that has the isosceles triangle. Again, same question. Which one of these is unique for every property? The property ID. So I'm going to highlight that row and click on the primary key, hit save. And then the last one is the reservation. Same thing. Which one is the primary key? If you have opened it in datasheet view, remember that you need to go to the design view in order to choose the primary key. Which one is the primary key? Reservation ID is the primary key. And then highlight, click on the primary key icon. Now one thing on the exam, and I know again people are not listening, but that's okay. Your primary key might not be the first one. I may hide it in between the fields. So you really need to look and see which one is unique. Okay, now save and close all three tables. And now we go back to the question, and it says define the relationship between the tables, the guest, the reservation, and property. So remember, to define relationships, you have to go to the database tools. Relationships are very important because without establishing relationship, you cannot run queries. So I cannot ask question to the database, and actually that's the whole purpose of defining or designing a database, is to be able to run queries on top of it. So I'll click on database tools and I'll click on relationships. And you see all three tables added, but that may not be the case on the exam. Normally, because this database has been open before, that's why you see all three already added. But normally, you will see that particular window open for you. And now you have to add the tables. Add guest, add property, and add reservation. And please add each one only once, and then close. What if someone click on a particular table twice? So you see guest and guest 1. What do? Delete your guest 1. So just highlight it and hit the delete button. And ask yourself, before you attempt to run the relationships, ask yourself, what are the relationship between these three tables? Remember we said, and that's a very good thing that you are mentioning, that the relationship exists between tables that have what? A common attribute. Very good. Well, if you just by common sense, there is no direct relationship between a guest and a property because a guest does not own the property. What does the guest do? Make reservation. So the relationship between guest and reservation, not between guest and property. What's common between guest and reservation? Guest ID. Now remember, we said that in order to establish relationship between two tables, they have to have a common attribute. To do the link, you have to drag the primary key. What is common? You said the guest ID. Where is it primary? So you have to drag it from the guest table and put it on top of guest ID on the reservation table and not the opposite. If you do the opposite, Access will allow you to do that, but you do not get the right answer when you run the queries. I hope everybody is listening to what I'm saying. Yes. And then you click on Enforce Referential Integrity, Cascade Update, and Cascade Delete. And then create, but before we create, we need to explain why are we checking these. what we are saying is, I'm not going to accept a reservation for someone who is not registered as a guest. And a lot of sites now do this. They do not allow you to buy unless you are a customer first, and then you are allowed to buy. So they say create an account, and then you are able to place an order for the online shopping. So here we are saying we are not going to allow a reservation unless the person is registered as a guest. Now the update and the delete means, let's say someone doesn't want to do business with us anymore. What should we do? Yes, I have to delete the reservation before I delete them. I cannot delete, and that's what we say by cascade delete. If I'm going to delete a guest, I have to delete their reservation. If I update a guest, I'm going to update also the reservation, the information about that guest in the reservation table. So that's all what it means: enforce referential integrity, cascade update and cascade delete, and hit the create button. What do you see now? And it's not infinity, it is many. And how can I read? How can I read that relationship? Excellent, excellent. For every one guest, there are many reservations, 0 or many. But a particular reservation belongs to what? One guest only. So that's the line that's there. There is a question on the test that actually asks you for this. So you need to be to remember it. And this session is all recorded. So all you have to do is go back and listen to the recording and watch it. You have both the voice and the image, and now I'm using, huh? Yeah, on the test. What are you supposed to do outside of test? No, before the test. You record, you listen before the test. Normally, normal people prepare for tests. They study for tests. That's the normal people. Okay, now, looking at the relationship between property and reservation. Now, what's common between them? Property ID. What did I say? Where should I drag it from?
Reservation to property.
Drag it from where it is primary.
Primary to reservation.
Yes, not the other way around. So from property, take it from the property table, put it on top of property ID in the reservation table, and not the opposite, and we'll do exactly the same thing. And what we are saying, we are not going to reserve a property that does not exist in the property table. Makes sense. I cannot reserve a property that I do not own or is not registered or stored. If I make a change to the property, it will reflect on the reservation. If I delete a property, I have to delete all of the reservation. Let's say I sell a particular property. Then I cannot reserve it to anyone. And I hit create, and same thing. What does this mean? One property has many reservations, but a particular reservation belongs to one property. Okay, that answers our question number 8. Are we all done with that step? Question number 10 says, create a query that displays the guest last name, the city, the state, the reservation ID, start date, and end date fields. Save the query as the guest trip dates, and then run the query. What are the tables that I need to add in that query? Guest and reservation. So now I'm going to save this and close the relationship. And I want to create a query. Where should I click? on the create button. And I want to create a query, so where should I click? Query design. And I need to add the guest table and the reservation table. And I close. And now it says you want to show on that query the guest last name, the city, the state. So I'm going to click on guest last name, the city, and the state. And then they say the reservation ID, the start date and end date. So double click on reservation ID, start date and end date. And it tells you to save the query as guest trip dates. And run the query. So now when you run it, you get a report with the guest last name, the city, the state, the reservation ID, the start date, and the end date. So going back to the design, remember you have to have the guest last name, the city, the state, the reservation ID, the start date and end date. Are we all done with that part? Okay, now this part is not on the test, but you have a similar question on your test. Let's say, for example, I want to find out how many days the guests are staying. What is it that I need to do? If I tell you, look at any one guest and tell me how many days they are staying in the property, how can you tell? So count the days between the start date and the end date. It's actually the difference between the end date and the start date. So let's do that. Now, you should have already saved your query, and then you need to click because you want to add a calculated field. Go to a new column. Go to a new column and click on Builder. And remember, Builder allows you to define new fields, new calculated fields. So when I click on Builder, I see all of my fields. What is the formula that I need in order to find out the number of days a customer is staying? End date minus start date. And hit OK. And now in the new column, you have the word expression 1. I don't like the word, the field will be named expression 1. What do I need to change expression 1 to? Number of days. So go ahead and highlight. Or duration of stay. Something like that. If you want to call it number of days or duration of stay. Make sure that you do not erase the colon. You have to have the colon. And now run the query. And I run it. And now I can see the duration of stay. That I have the number of days for every single reservation now, or for every single guest. Yeah. So, what is the average? The average stay is what? It's probably something between 14 and 7. So, is there a way that I can tell the average of stay? Where should I click from your Excel now knowledge? Where should I click in order to see the average? No, not bill. Totals at the top. So click on totals and see what will happen. you see a total, but I don't want a total. I want to change it to average. So go ahead and type in average. They don't allow you to type. And choose. Now when you choose, the average is a 9.13. So on average, they stay around 9.13 days. Yeah, that's fine, but just like change. Okay, so your average stay is 9.13. Okay, now go back now. So go ahead and save this. I want you to save it so that you would be able to see, because on the exam you will get the same question. So now we go back to the exam. And the next question says, create a new query. Well, we haven't finished. In the datasheet view, use an auto filter to sort query results from oldest to newest start date. Save and close the query. So here is my query. I need to sort from oldest to newest. So when you click on the drop down, you will see an option to sort oldest to newest, so you choose that, and everything is sorted for you. And it says to save and close. Okay, now the next question asks you to create a query that displays, again, the guest last name, the city, the reservation ID, the start date, and the property ID for all guests from Illinois. For all guests from Illinois, sort in ascending order by city. Now, first thing, of course you won't notice it. What is strange about this query? Well, let's try and answer it, and you will realize what's the problem. So, last name, city, reservation ID, start date, and property ID. So again, I'm going to click on the create and query design, and I need my guest, and I need the property. I need the reservation. So I need to delete property in there, and they say the last name. The last name, the city. And then the reservation ID, the start date, and the property ID. And I run it. Before I put any criteria, I'm going to run it. Everything is fine in there. But then they tell me, for guests from Illinois, how can I translate that? That's a criteria, which means I need to add something in the row for criteria. The criteria is for what field? Is Illinois a city? It's a state. So even though they don't ask me to add the state, I have to add it. And that's another thing that, again, you will see on the exam. There will be one field that I ask you to use as a criteria, and it will not be among the list of fields that you need to show on the report, which means you have to add it. And now how do I put the criteria? Illinois is a state. How are states written? IL. So even though I spell Illinois in the question, in your query, you have to write IL only because that's how it's written in the database. So just type understate IL and run it. So now, all of the guests that are displayed are from Illinois. Does this last column add any value? No, so what do I need to do? I need it in order to restrict, but I don't need to show it. So what should I do? Uncheck. And now everything is fine, so I'm going to save it as guests from Illinois. So again, to summarize, everything in the query was simple. Add the last name, the city, reservation ID, start date, and property ID. And then they ask you to add a criteria. They say, only from Illinois. And I think about it, where is Illinois? It's not a city, it is a state. So even though they don't ask me to add state, I have to add state in order to be able to impose the criteria. And then I run my query and I see all of the rows saying Illinois, 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 and I don't see a value for it, so I uncheck it. Okay. Question after that, in 12. Create a query that displays the guest last name, the city, the reservation ID, start date, and property ID for all guests who are not from Illinois. Same query. I don't have to repeat it again. What should I do? I have the same query, but I cannot lose this one because it's a question. If you lose it, if I rename it, for example, I'm going to lose the points. So what should I do? Copy it, close it, and now on the left-hand side, you should see guests from Illinois. Right-click on it, and choose copy. And then right-click again outside, like in the left-hand area, and hit paste. And now it says copy of guests from Illinois. So change it to guest outside of Illinois. So now I have two queries. Right now they are exactly the same, but one is named guest outside of Illinois. What do I need to do in order to change it? The restriction should be what? Currently, the restriction says list all guests from the state of Illinois. So in order to display all guests outside of Illinois, what should be the restriction? Not IN. Not IN. Yeah. And not is a reserved word, so just like put not, or you can also put the less than and the greater than sign. The less than and the greater than sign together means not. And run it. And now I have some, but I don't know, I'm not sure. So I'm going to go and show the state. And I want to see if it's actually outside of Illinois or not. Yes, they are. They are from Ontario or Indiana. ON is what? Ontario or? Huh? It is in Canada, but it is a province in Canada. New York? Oregon, maybe Oregon, yeah. Okay, guys. So all understood about these three queries? Excellent. Okay, go ahead and save it. My design is exactly the same like previous one. My restriction is not Illinois. And not is the less than, greater than sign, or you can spell it out, not.
Yeah.
Okay, the next query says you want the guest last name, the city, the reservation ID, start date, and property ID for all guests who are not from Illinois, which we have done, and who are renting a property beginning in the month of June 2010. So that means that their start date is anywhere in June. So going back to the design of that query, the criteria for my start date should be what? Any time in June means what? Between what and what?
1 to 30.
Between 1 and 30 June. So I will have to write between, and beginning of June is 6, 1, 10, because the date there is for year 2010, and 6, 30, 10. So again, it should read like this. Between 6/1/10 and 6/30/10. No, the two restrictions need to be there, otherwise you lose points. It says guests not from Illinois, and they have rented during the month of June. So you have two criteria. One is not Illinois, and the other one is that the start date is between 6/1/10 and 6/30/10. So between is another reserved word that you can use. You can use not, you can use between, you can use equal, not equal. Okay, now I run it, and I see I only have one guest who is outside of Illinois and is renting in the month of June. So I need to save that. And that ends that query. The next query says, use the reservation table. So if you are behind, now is the time to leave what you are doing and start with me, so that you don't fall further behind. If you are behind, if you haven't finished, leave it and go and create a new query.
We have 3 queries, right? We have the guests from Illinois, guests outside of Illinois. We have guests, that's correct?
That's right.
Okay, I thought we added another one, but that was just we were redoing.
Okay, so the next one is asking you to determine the minimum, the average, and the maximum rental rate for all reservations. Specify the column names of lowest rate, average rate, and highest rate. So I know that the rate is under the reservation table, so I'm going to click on Create Query Design, and I will add reservation table only because it is this one that has the rental rate. I want the average, the minimum, and the maximum of rental rate. How many times should I click on rental rate? 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. And now I want the average, the maximum, and the minimum. Where should I click? Look at your menu and ask yourself, where should we click in order to find average, minimum, and maximum? Totals. So click on totals. That will add a new row that has group by, group by, group by. I'll see if I can change it. So I'll click on the first one, and now I pull down the menu, and I have an average, and another, and I have a minimum, and the third one, and I choose maximum. So one more time. I'm going to click on the Create tab. I'll click on Query Design. I'll double click on the reservation table and close. Why did I add the reservation table? Because it has the rental rate. I want to add rental rate 3 times. Why? Because I want the average, the minimum, and the maximum. And now I ask myself, how can I add average, minimum, and maximum? I look at the menu and I see the summation, the totals. And remember, it is this icon that you use in order to find count, average, minimum, maximum. When I click on it, a new row is added, group by. And I'll change each one. The first one will be average. The second is minimum. And the third is max. And now I run. And I see average of rentals, minimum of rentals, and maximum of rentals. And when I go to the question, it says, name them lowest rate, average rate, and highest rate. So I go back to the design. And I want to put minimum first. So I'm going to highlight the column and move it to the beginning. So I have minimum, lowest, average, and highest rate. How do I change the title of the column? Highlight the column and right-click and choose Properties. And that will open a menu on the right-hand side. For each column now, you will change the caption. So the first caption is lowest rate. And then highlight now the second column and change the caption to average rate. And the caption, you right-click on the, after you highlight the column, right-click, choose Properties. That opens a window, a menu, and one of the options is caption, the one before last. And you change it for every single one. So just highlight the columns and you keep on changing the caption for each one. So now when you run the query, your query will say lowest rate, average rate, and highest rate.
I have one question about this, like not, mine isn't like highlighted on there. I talked to you. So once it gets to so much part trying to put it on there, it's like,
Let me finish, and then because we have just a limited amount of time. Okay, then going back to the question, it says create now a form. And in the form, I have the guests and the reservations. The guest ID, first name, last name, the city, the state, and the phone. This is all from guest. And under reservation, I have a reservation ID, start date, end date, property, and the people. So you have to be very careful about what is showing so that you don't get points taken off. So now going to the query, I'm going to save this as rate statistics. And close it. I want to create a form, so I'll click on create. And I'm going to choose the form wizard because I need to choose specific things. And you need to choose the guest table first. And if you look, you have the guest ID, the first name, last name, city, state, and phone. Guest ID, first name, last name, not the address, but the city, the state, and the phone. So I'm only including what I'm seeing in the picture. Then I want to add the reservation, so I'll change to the reservation table. And it says, choose the reservation ID, the start date, the end date, the property ID, and the people. So reservation ID, start date, end date, property ID, and people. And it has to be in that order that you see. And hit next. And it says, do you want to see the guest first and then the reservation? That's exactly what's showing. Next. Do you want it in tabular or data sheet? The tabular looks exactly the same like what you want. But before you hit finish, you have a form title and a subform. So you go back to the query, to the form, and it says your top is guests and reservation. And the lower one is just reservation. So I need to make that change here. So guests and reservation, and the lower one should be just reservation, and hit finish. And I have exactly the same look that I have in the exam. If you see that you cannot see the whole title, make sure that you double click on the edges. Thank you very much. Okay, so go ahead and save that form as guest and reservation form. And close. My last question is to create now a report that again shows the guest ID, the first name, last name, address, city, state, postal code. So everything from the guest table and everything from the reservation table. So this time, I'm going to highlight the guest table and I will click on report. And it didn't show the, okay, it doesn't work. So, well, you see that it doesn't show the reservation, so that doesn't work. So I'm gonna delete that. And I will click on report wizard. And same thing, I'm going to choose all of the information from the guest table, and then I'll go to the reservation, and I will choose reservation ID, property ID, start date, end date, and people. And hit next, and it says, do you want to see the guest first and then the reservation? Yes. Do you want to do any grouping? Yes, by guest ID. Do you want to sort? Okay, we'll sort the next one with a reservation ID. And you can try each one, but just for the sake of time, this one is outlined. On the exam, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you, choose which one. And you want to choose the landscape so that you are able to see everything. And hit next. And the title, if you go back to the exam, the title is guest reservations. So you need to make sure that, again, the title of your report is guest reservations. And I have the same view like the one on the exam. So that's all for this exam. You will have the